All right, welcome everybody to the Lakers Legacy Podcast, where Coach JJ Redick, more like Coach Joy Redick, am I
Oh,
right? Because we've got that joy down in our hearts to kick off the new 2024-25 Lakers season. And judging from the Lakers Media Day on Monday, it seems like many of the Lakers players do as well. So move over facts over feelings. Hello, focus joy over hamster wheelings. I'm your host, Jonathan Hernandez, and I'm joined by my co host, Tommy Alexander. And Tommy, the Lakers 2024-25 season is officially here. How are you feeling about the dual sense of newness and familiarity at the same time that the Lakers are heading into the year with?
um, it's interesting because in some ways, media day is always like a fun time. I don't know. I usually get excited for. I know the players seem to hate it, or that's like the running joke at least on Spectrum coverage. But it's always like fun to see, the team that you've sort of been just imagining in your head, like all there together. Now this year, it's like to your point on familiarity. It's like there aren't that many new additions, but I think there are enough additions, I think, to make it interesting. And in many ways, I thought it was this year's was a lot more enlightening than last year's media day. So overall, I'm pretty excited with how it went.
Yeah, and a lot new additions up at the very top with Coach JJ Redick, of course. I think for me, it kind of feels like we get to redo last year in a way. Like the Lakers players seem like they took some Zyrtec D and were able to get rid of their allergies from last season and are now walking, talking, and thinking much clearer. Um, Last season, the fans and the players, we were all excited about what the team could be if we just built off of the continuity from the Western Conference Finals group from the year before. But obviously, due to various injuries and various Darvin Ham galaxy brains along the way, the plans of continuity were scrapped and the locker room began to splinter by December. And we could never fully regain our footing as the team was kind of just running on fumes by the end to make the playoffs. And they were almost in revolt against their own coach to prove that continuity does work if the coach had just played his best players earlier. So, in that sense, it almost feels like I'm projecting a lot on the players, I feel like, but that's the vibe that I got from this season with the returnees. It felt like they felt like last year was a mulligan, and the players, I think the sense that they get from JJ Redick is, at the very least, it sounds like on paper right now he won't approach the year the same way that Darvin Ham did, and he will lead with direct communication and intuitive common sense. And from that standpoint, I could sense a relief from the players as they talked. Everybody seemed a lot more like loose. And yeah, the overall sense that for me that was hard for me to shake was the players just pointing out the obvious of what seemed present this year that wasn't present last year, which could easily be seen as an indictment on last year's coaching staff, of course. But yeah, that's kind of the vibe I got. Did you kind of feel that same sort of sense that the Lakers players, it's like, again, we get to hit reset on last year because what they thought last year was going to be did not end up being that. But hopefully with this new coach, they can start anew. And it sucks that last year was a wasted year, but right on down the line from guys like D'Angelo Russell and especially Max Christie, they were like, okay, let's do this again.
Yeah, and it's hard to know. Part of it is like reading. We read our own context as fans into what everyone's
Sure.
saying, and I think if we listened back, which I will never do, to our own podcast from last year discussing the media day, we probably said similar things, right? So it's hard to know, but yeah, I think your overall point is well taken, and I feel the same way generally about like everything you covered.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of the things that Darvin Ham said, we were pretty positive about last year, especially facts over feelings. And then that ended up not being the case. Uh, Actions speak louder than words, and we will see the true extent of these words, these fluffy words by JJ Redick, but at the very least, JJ Redick and the rest of the team have a negative reference point from last year to build off of and hopefully not redo. Okay, so in today's episode, we are obviously going to talk about Media Day and the biggest quotes and observations that stood out to us. So, Tommy, why don't we start here and talk about common themes that we heard throughout the day? Because I think that lends some insight into where the players are at, and most importantly, just how much communication it seems like they've already had with JJ Redick. So, why don't we start with this banner theme: communication and the presence of structure? I think the first theme that I kept hearing was the clear presence of organization, structure, and process that the players, number one all the way down to number 15, have already felt very early on. I think D'Angelo Russell was probably the most vocal about any of the players regarding the lack of defensive structure or structure overall that the team had last year. And if you remember last year, even Anthony Davis mentioned to reporters towards the end of the season that the team felt disorganized and had no idea what they were doing out there, to which Darvin Ham responded with agree to disagree. But
Oh, yeah.
D'Angelo
Kind of
Russell
forgot
just,
about that.
yeah, it wasn't just D'Lo. But yeah, D'Angelo Russell in his interview kind of reiterated that last year the Lakers were just kind of winging it. And that this year, at least from the outset, it already seems like Redick is trying to implement structure into everything they do. And D'Lo went on to mention that he's never played in a system or structure like the one Redick is establishing, and even mentioned JJ Redick already texting him some plays over the offseason. And then on top of that, you heard from players like Rui Hachimura and Max Christie, who mentioned that Redick has already made it clear what the systems and offensive and defensive goals for the team are and what the expectations are on them as role players. And then even more evident is the fact that Cam Reddish was like, I'm not one to compare, but it seems like there's more organization. So just your thoughts on the theme of communication and the presence of structure.
Yeah, it's actually been very, very refreshing to hear all of this. It's one thing, and I think we've touched on this so many times, but just to sort of reiterate, like there are sort of like two types of coaches, and I think you've seen this. Folks who watch the NFL have probably like picked this up faster. The NFL tends to be like, it seems like the NBA for whatever reason lags like 10 years behind the NFL with respect to stuff like this, but there was this new wave of coaches that came in around the Sean Payton, or not Sean Payton, the Rams coach,
Mike
and like
McDaniel.
his little tree, and yeah, Mike McDaniels and Cliff Kingsbury, like all these coaches sort of emerged, who were like younger guys, not old school football, like you're going to run through a brick wall because I told you to, like type of guys, like guys who are like applying analytics, have fresh perspectives, are detail oriented, and are looking to like extract every advantage they can in every matchup. Really use like viewing coaching, I think, as additive and not just a guy who's there and you don't want him to be a net negative. You affirmatively want this guy to be a positive. And it seems like the NBA is catching up a little bit, to that sort of thinking. And you see guys like Joe Mazzulla getting, who JJ Redick, by the way, like mentioned is one of his like good friends, or sort of guys
Yeah.
he goes to with coaching questions. Like guys like that get promoted who are super young and don't have the resume, I guess, on paper that matches some of the more veteran, like Mike Budenholzers of the league, right? But they're clearly bringing something that is a little bit different, and one of the things they're bringing is this extreme like communication and organization and sort of detail oriented mindset, and it seems like all of that is being reflected in with the players, right? It's like you hear so much, like I'm not going to go back and listen to what we said last year about what those guys said last year, but I from what I recall, it was like sort of a lot of we're gonna roll with what worked for us last year, and we're gonna play tough defense, and we're gonna run, and it's all just very broad generalities. And then when you hear guys talk about how things have gone so far this year, it just feels like a lot more specific. It feels like everybody's on the same page. And it's not just like blanket goals of like, we want to play good team defense. It seems like things are a lot, I want to get better defensively. It feels like there are a lot more specificities this year that I think have been
Oh,
lacking
looks
in
like we
prior
lost
years.
Tommy. Let's wait till he shows back up again.
It just feels like we're coaching to the players now and not just using or viewing the coach as like a figure to sort of keep everybody organized. It's like something more than that, and I think that's coming through in how the players have responded already.
Yeah, I think we're coaching to the players now and not to the media because at sometimes it seems like what the coaches say and do are to appease, what they think the outside wants to hear, right? And it sounds like JJ Redick, I mean, it sounds great to us, the outside, but his priority first and foremost is making sure that he's articulating his directions clearly to the players. And if they don't understand, he's going to repeat himself in a different way, So I think that's what I appreciate, like just his kind of intentional and direct communication. Um, and to your point, you mentioned it, but I also really liked his theme of attention to detail. It's funny because in separate interviews, and I posted this on Twitter, but LeBron mentioned that the reason why they lost the Denver series, that a Denver series that they probably should have won, was because they didn't pay attention to detail, especially in crunch time. Separately, JJ Redick mentioned that the key for this team succeeding will be their attention to detail and being focused on the minutiae of the game. Because, as he mentioned, this team isn't lacking in talent and depth when everybody's healthy. It's the attention to detail aspect of things that will really elevate them. So, any thoughts on just like JJ Redick's comments about really getting into the nitty gritty of things as a whole, but also as individuals, making sure that even the Cam Reddishes of the world specifically understand what he did wrong here and can relay it back to JJ Redick.
Yeah, of course. So we touched on this on previous podcasts, but I think it really is the case, right? That it seems like younger players nowadays respond better when they're given, I guess between two types of coaching, two coaching styles. It feels like younger players are responding more to being given reasons for why they need to do things or why they should be doing things, as opposed to, the more old school. I don't want to, single out Mark Jackson, but he just is the guy that always comes to mind with stuff like this. But like the more old school, like Mark Jackson, Doc Rivers. I mean, Darvin was kind of like this, like, you know, basketball, it's just a game. Like, we're not going to overcomplicate it. It sort of feels like there's this like old school mentality of like, if we play harder and we have better players, we're just going to win anyway. You know what I mean? And it's less
Yeah.
like, I think and again, this is just like a theory on my part, but I get the sense from just listening to guys like Austin and Max Christie, honestly, even D'Lo, it's come through quite a bit. You get the sense that they they'll play for and respect any coach because that's their coach, and these are professional athletes who have grown up being athletes, and they understand how it works, and this and that, but they view it differently when they get the sense that like the person who's telling them what to do really understands what they're talking about. And part of how you
Mm-hmm.
show you understand what you're talking about is by like clearly articulating the reason for everything you're suggesting that they do. And so these types of details that JJ is so focused on, I think is really going to resonate with the players. And it's sort of like taking me back to, that initial Frank Vogel year where he had a loaded up coaching staff with a bunch of former head coaches. And it seemed like they were really focused on, the day-to-day, like detail-oriented type of stuff. Like I recall during that season, LeBron making comments throughout the year about how their scouting reports were always like extremely detailed and on point,
Mm-hmm.
and it gave the guys a lot of confidence about how to approach every single matchup. And JJ, I think, is even going to take that to like another level, because he's like a self-described sicko, and to me, like, that's what you want in your head coach. And and hopefully it works, right? And the guys start to see results, and I think they will. And that's all sort of his theory. His theory seems to be, if I come at this with like my sicko mentality, that's going to resonate with all of these guys, and they're going to understand, that I'm telling them to do these things not because I'm a coach, not because like I'm not solely because I'm trying to motivate them. That's like part of coaching, but that becomes the sole focus of coaching for some people is motivation, but it's also instruction. And so like instructing these guys, like, you know, I think it's going to resonate more with them if they understand the details, and they know that the coach is looking out for the details.
But I think also because he's literally in the trenches with them, making sure that they understand. If they don't understand, he'll meet them halfway in the middle to make sure that they compromise on a similar sort of pathway. And so it to me, I think they will respect his own attention to detail and the work that he puts in, you know? And so I think finally it sounds like, at least right now, that they have a coach who are sort of speaking their language and also speaking their language with regards to putting the hours in, right? Which was a problem with Darvin Ham. Anyways, let's take a break. When we return, let's talk about some of the individual players and quotables that stood out to us. So, yeah, we will catch you guys after the turn. All right, so we are back. Tommy, before we get to the individual players, one other thing that I really liked about what Reddit continued to emphasize was that yes, he can be stringent on structure and as hard nosed on the nitty gritty details of the game as he wants, but none of that's going to matter if the players aren't having fun or they don't have that joy. It's going to all be pointless. And at the end of the day, I really like that Redick understands that the best teams need to have a real sense of camaraderie and fun throughout the season to succeed. Otherwise, the daily grind of the NBA will just eat away at you. So I really love that point of his about focus, joy, and making sure to cultivate a locker room that's super hardworking, but also a little litty as well. You know what I'm saying? And that's kind of like the Mike McDaniel sort of tree of coaching, right? Where he wants to have fun with the dudes first, and I think that will help like garner more buy-in from the players if they're having fun and they have joy. So, um, let's talk about what players and what quotables stood out to you, and let's start with D'Angelo Russell. Um, Very interesting D'Lo this year. Um, he came out and was kind of cheeky at the start of his press conference, starting things out with a very wink wink surprise surprise, which I kind of like cheeky D'Lo. It's a newer, different version than the DGAF D'Lo that we got last season. A much more jovial, whatever happens happens D'Lo. Whereas last year we got the fuck you DGAF D'Lo, but this year it sounds like we're getting DGAF D'Lo, but I'm going to do whatever it takes to help my team win, regardless of whether or not I'm here for the long term or not. I'm not giving my haters more fuel to misconstrue my words. So I'm just not going to speak as much, is pretty much the message that I was getting. And because of that, it seemed like, I mean, not seemed like, he literally apologized for not being as professional as he wanted to be last season and vowed to take more accountability for his words and actions this year, quote unquote, especially if the coaches or whoever doesn't, which is like a clear low shot at, or, clearly throwing shade at Darvin Ham. But yeah, overall, D'Angelo Russell he was firing from the subtext clip in the most calm and PC manner. And I honestly was here for all of it, but I also agreed with what James Worthy said. The apology wasn't necessary, especially because we all know who he's directing this apology to, Tommy. He was directing this apology to the very obtuse, incendiary portion of this fan base that loves to burn him at the stake for anything and everything he says and does. But overall, I like that he was very transparent, at the very least, about clarifying what he did or didn't do last year and saying that he'll do a better job of keeping himself in check if, he's unaware that his words are being misconstrued. And the most ironic part about, him saying that my words are always misconstrued is the fact that he misconstrued the word misconstrued by saying misconscrewed or something like that. I don't know if you saw his interview with John Ireland, but he kept saying, yeah, misconscrewed. But anyways, your thoughts on D'Angelo Russell's presser?
Yeah, I think with D'Lo, it's like a really good example of how there are like two types of guys, right? There are two types of players. It's like you get LeBron James, you put him on a team with coached by Byron Scott or Luke Walton, and he's going to probably respond as a player the same way as if his coach was Greg Popovich. You know what I mean? And then with other guys like D'Lo, I think, you know, if he gets pushed in the wrong way, he could just tune out the coach, and that's just how some people are, right? That's like a personality thing, and I think I, I'm actually amazed with the way that D'Lo was treated last year, that he did not just have a complete tank, like wipe this season out of my history type of thing. In fact, in many ways, he had like a career, one of his best seasons of his career.
Mhm.
So, and that was with a coach who had no faith in him, was like publicly not, giving him any support, was sitting him on the bench. I mean, literally brought him off the bench, even though he was like our third best player for most of the year, right? And was going, it felt like at times going out of his way to sort of single D'Lo out. And again,
Mhm.
for sort of like nonsense, like preconceived notions of guys, like instead of trying to work with the skills that you have and kind of build off of that, just full stop coming in and just deciding game one of the season that D'Lo doesn't need to be playing at crucial moments in close games, and
He
then
was he was
making,
reading too much Twitter.
yeah, exactly. And then doing like, a 180. And by the end of the season, this dude is playing 40 minutes a night because you realize you need him to win. So it was just so all over the map. I mean, I actually was shocked. I looked at this the other day. D'Lo played 37 minutes a game against Denver, which is like crazy to me. Given, how the season started, or like at least that December, January stretch with him went. Um, I'm excited to see what D'Lo does this year. I think JJ is going to use him properly. I think JJ understands the value that he provides. I, agree with James Worthy's point about how, like, you don't owe an apology to the people who are complaining about D'Lo are so far off the planet that it's like not even worth engaging. You can have your thoughts about whether or not D'Lo has flaws as a player. That's like you're totally entitled to that. But you cannot objectively look at the team, at least for the regular season where we won 47 games and, 3 games out of being a top 4 seed or whatever it was, like, and say that D'Lo was a problem in that. D'Lo is the only reason we were in that discussion, because he carried us for so many games. I mean, he set the franchise record for 3-pointers made. He was one of our best playmakers. He had multiple games where he put the team on his back when LeBron and AD were out, and won critical games. And you could say, like, okay, the Boston game, whatever, fluke. The Milwaukee game, you get lucky once in a while. These were we were in a conference. We were throwing away, games like they didn't matter from the beginning of the season. Okay, like, and so to win those types of games, it's not just like, whatever, not a big deal. Like, that was the difference between us being the 7th seed and having home court advantage in the play-in, and like, or sorry, being the 8th seed and having 2 chances to win the play-in, or being like where the Warriors were. I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
we got, like, people are going to forget, like, things get lost to history. It was down to like the last game the Warriors had to choke a game away to like let us get into that 7-8 range. Otherwise, we were going to be 9-10 and have to win to get in. So,
Yeah.
like, these, like,
Even But even beyond the on-court stuff, because I feel like we're kind of getting away from it, beyond the on-court stuff, he's directly addressing the off-court stuff and how he's portrayed by the media. And even in that respect, every single one of his teammates, I mean, Austin came up to defend him. He's like, I don't understand why people have a problem with D'Angelo Russell. He's a great teammate. So like even that like butts heads with one another, that why do fans care about what D'Lo says in an interview when his teammates don't have a problem with it if he's cultivating a great locker room atmosphere? So
yeah,
it was funny to me that D'Lo felt like he had to apologize because his internal team was like, hey, this is how you're being perceived. But it sucks, but I'm glad that he did that just to shut up the to your point, like the far side of the spectrum haters, because
yeah.
on the court, off the court, he was a valued asset to the
He
team.
was. He was. And by the way, I think part of this, right, when he talks about like his team, is like he has probably, it's probably been drilled and hammered into his brain at this point that part of the some lady just did something very crazy. It's probably being drilled and hammered into his brain at this point that like part of the reason he's had consecutive summers with like questionable free agent value, notwithstanding the fact that he's had like good seasons prior to those, free agent opportunities, is because of how he publicly portrays himself. So, and again, it's like if you watch the games, there's no doubt that D'Angelo Russell is showing up to play these games. I mean, like I said, he's setting records on the court, and all of that is fine. And so, to the extent he feels like he wants to clean up his off court image, that's totally fine, and I don't think should be construed as anything other than that, really.
Or misconstrued, as D'Angelo Russell puts it.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's talk about LeBron James, because the dude seems rejuvenated. And I think a lot of that obviously stems from having his son, Bronny James, there with him. And in spite of the Lakers not doing anything this offseason, I think just having Bronny there in a Lakers jersey next to him, ribbing him for being a boomer dad, that seems to have brought like a new life and excitement into LeBron's demeanor that I think will help keep LeBron engaged. Not that he's not typically engaged, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it'll keep LeBron like more sustained and more sustained in his rejuvenation throughout the season, and maybe have less of those lulls mid-season that we typically have, because my god, LeBron, your son is watching, he's right there. But I think for me, I just liked how renewed in spirit LeBron James felt, and him just reiterating that from his Olympics bout with Anthony Davis, that he has a lot left in the tank. He feels like he's already ramped up. He's ready to do whatever Redick needs of him, whether that's play more off ball, shoot more threes, etc. I know a lot of cynical people will probably take LeBron James being paired with his son as a sign that he's resigned to being mediocre, because having his son on the team will suffice as distraction enough for him to get through the regular season. But for me, I kind of take it the opposite way, as wouldn't LeBron James want to have one of the best seasons of his career with his own son on the team? God forbid, like, it's just going to turn into a laughing stock, LeBron James and Bronny James, wasted season for the Lakers. I don't think that's the narrative LeBron James wants to have with Bronny James right there. So I think personally for LeBron, having Bronny there with him might be a great galvanizing force for himself to keep him motivated throughout the season. Not that he needs that extra motivation because year 22, age 40, etc. But it's a nice added boost. But your thoughts on LeBron James and Bronny James, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so I think part of his rejuvenated energy is from the Olympics. I think after the last couple of seasons, I mean, like everybody, right? We have the Pat Bev comment about how they didn't practice, and Darvin Ham didn't think they had to practice. We have the D'Lo comments, and frankly, comments from Austin, AD, Cam, like multiple guys in other contexts about how they were just sort of winging it. I think the Olympic experience with guys who were all driven, locked in with the same goal and were organized, that probably brought some joy back to him with respect to basketball, as opposed to what can often feel like a slog in the NBA. And then, yeah, the Bronny thing I think is also going to make a big difference. I mean, I'm a relatively new dad too, and I suspect this aspect of fatherhood never changes to some degree, but it's exciting. Things that have become mundane, in your adult life are exciting to see through the eyes of your kid. You know what I mean? And I'm sure that doesn't really change. It probably changes in some ways, but to some degree, that never goes away. And I sort of, have the sense that, just normal stuff, day one of training camp, okay, 22 years of doing this. Here we are, another day one of training camp. But it's like day one of training camp, like first day of training camp for your son. And so that like adds a little bit of excitement. And none of this is really probably going to actually matter in terms of tangible on-court results, which I only in the sense that like Bronny is not going to play, and that's been stated like multiple times by multiple people. But yeah, just having him around, that narrative, again, this guy has accomplished everything there is to accomplish in the sport. And this is like a new thing. And so I think like anytime you can get something like that, it's going to bring a new level of excitement. And so that was nice to see in LeBron's interviews.
Yeah, for sure. Now, moving on to Anthony Davis. So AD seems very focused this year on making sure that the Lakers are a good defensive team, regardless of whether or not they have the personnel that reflects them being a good defensive team. And he mentioned just sort of putting the onus on himself to uphold the defense and sort of lead by example so that it trickles down to the rest of the team. Obviously, I think we all hope the front office eventually helps AD's burden out and that Redick puts him in lineups to maximize his true defensive capabilities. But I do appreciate that AD seems locked in into not making any excuses this year and just trudging forward with the pieces they have, because it sounds like he's very frustrated with not being recognized as a perennial defensive player of the year candidate. And I don't know, this is maybe galaxy brain of me, but I'm sure there's a little part of AD that's like, if I can push this Lakers squad into being a top 5 defense this year, which is what he said they could be, what else are the voters going to say then? You know, so any thoughts on AD and like him sort of taking on the defensive onus, even though, you know, it would help him if he had another bruising big next to him.
Yeah, it was all good stuff to hear, and I think part of the optimism, um, again, is like, it's not, the coaching staff seems to have given him the impression, which they should be giving him, that like it's not going to be just up to him to figure it out. Like, AD, you're our defensive player of the year candidate. You're going to be out there with whatever lineup you're out there. We're expecting you to make this like a number one defense. It starts with like holding everyone accountable and holding the other four guys out there accountable and coming up with team defensive concepts that play to AD's strengths while he's on the floor. It just felt like, the last few years, our team defense concepts were not necessarily like playing to AD's strengths. It was like very high level, like, I mean, we've talked about this, but it's like leave a guy open, funnel to AD, but then there's nobody to like crash the boards on the weak side. So it's like, the fact that he said we want to be a top 5 defense and we've added no defenders to this roster, at least didn't add any compared to what we had last year, other than getting maybe a couple guys back from injury, but we'll see, right? The fact that he said that suggests to me that he, at least for now, is buying into like whatever our new team defensive concepts are going to be. Um, it's not just going to be we have to try harder or whatever. But it's nice to hear him with the defensive player of the year goal again, and for him to recognize that. And by the way, this was probably something that JJ told him, right? Recognizing that it's not just about him, it is about how the team performs. It just like the MVP. Because when JJ Redick didn't vote for AD to be first team
Yep.
all defense, that was the rationale he gave. He's like,
Yep.
you may be, I mean, he said this on national TV, like you're
Yeah.
maybe the best individual defender in the league overall, but you can't be considered, one of the top all NBA defense if you're not if you're not if your team is not performing. And so driving that home is like really important too, because AD came in last year with like I want to be defensive player of the year goals, and he started the season. Folks remember like averaging like 5 stocks a game, or like he had like the first couple months he was like on an absurd tear, and notwithstanding his like individual performance, we were terrible as a team defensively. So, it is like the attention to detail and getting guys to buy into certain mindsets it's kind of coming through, even with that.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with you. AD pretty much just said to JJ Redick, he said, as the kids say, Tommy, bet. Uh, so one other thing that was very apparent in the in all of media day was apparently JJ Redick wants everyone to shoot more threes. Rui Hachimura mentioned it. Anthony Davis mentioned it. LeBron mentioned it. Austin Reeves mentioned it. Cam Reddish said that he's focused the most on catch and shoots, working on his catch and shoot threes. I'm a little disappointed Jackson Hayes didn't mention it, but whatever. For the most part, the main offensive directive for our team this upcoming season seems to be clear. Get that 3-point volume up. We can do it. But Tommy, outside of that, was there anything else that stood out to you, whether it was like an observational thing, like, oh, Dalton Connect looks buff as hell, which he does, but anything else you want to point out?
The one big key, maybe we're going to talk about this anyway, but I thought one thing that was very interesting to me, and again, like just sort of sort of drives home this idea that like we are entering the season with a plan. We're not doing this like thing we've done the last few years, which I guarantee I've said. I'm not going to listen, but I guarantee I've said this in the past, which is that it has always felt in the preseason like we're just like on ice. We're playing on ice while everybody else is like playing on the court. It's a bunch of guys like scrambling around, and it like getting organized, and it always feels like we're rolling into the season at a time where like, okay, this identity that we came into camp with should now be really solidified. And instead it's felt like the opposite. Like we get through the whole preseason, never really feels like we have an identity. And then it's like we're still like haphazardly falling backwards into the start of the regular season. And the messaging is just like, well, it's an 82 game season. It's going to take time. And so, as again, one more example of like how that's sort of being approached differently. JJ Redick has just flat out said, day one of training camp, we're going to have a 9-man rotation. And so I think
Yeah.
that's tighter, actually. I mean, that's certainly tighter than it's been the last couple years under Ham, because most games we were playing 10, and if not like 11 sometimes. I think having like a solidified 9-man rotation coming out of camp is already such like a big improvement over what it's been last year, where it's felt like we go into camp with like who's going to win all these like individual battles, and then we leave camp being like, I don't know who won any of those individual battles. So it's like just again, is I've appreciated all of the sort of general commentary that I think supports this notion that they really do have a plan. And if they're looking at a 9-man rotation, it's like you could probably get to like 8 guys pretty quickly who are going to be there. So it really comes down to like camp is just going to be a bunch of guys vying for like one spot, really. And to set that
Mhm.
tone day one, like this is just how it's going to be. It's not going to be season battles where like we're going to start the season with Cam Reddish playing 30 games, and then depending on how that goes, we'll go to Max Christie for 30 games. I mean, how many times over the years have we seen this like sort of stuff where it's like, we're going to give this guy a run for 2 weeks, then we're going to look at this guy for 2 weeks. It's just like have all that stuff like planned out going into the year. And that's the best way to do it in my opinion, and that seems like what we're doing now.
Yeah, I'm a little dubious at whether he'll be able to stick to that plan just because who knows who becomes injured, by the end of training camp or whatever. Who knows who's banged up. But I at least like that he has a straightforward path and goal to sort of trudge towards and to lay out for the rest of the team, where even if it's like a loose 10-man rotation, at least he's setting the tone from the outset that actually I'm looking at a core 9 guys, and I think that that has an effect on sort of the competition that the players will have in training camp, et cetera, et cetera. So,
And also, by the way, sorry, not
yeah,
to expound too much, but like
yeah,
it also sets the expectations for the players so that like,
yeah.
when the season starts and they're not playing, it's not like guys pouting on the bench.
Yeah, and also like don't get too comfortable. If he had said it's a 10-man rotation or an 11-man rotation, it's easy to get comfortable because you're like you do the math in your head. If you're like Jackson Hayes and you're like, oh, I'm in. And for him it might be actually I'm in because Christian Wood, Jared Vanderbilt is out. But if Jackson Hayes sucks, JJ Redick's going to be like, yeah, we're going to play Rui at center, and there's our eight to 9-man rotation. But yeah, I agree with you. I am glad that he's at least laying things out in a very straightforward manner from the outset and not treating this, Tommy, as a marathon like Darvin Ham did, because JJ Redick knows they're already behind the 8 ball with regards to what they want to do. So he's starting off sprinting already. The fact that these players came into media day kind of like first day of school to like a new administration that already seems to have the entire itinerary perfectly laid out for
Yep.
them, I think that speaks volumes. It's like it's not up in the air right now. They've
Yep.
already laid the foundation for the whole first half of the season already. They will adjust along the way, obviously, but it's more than what they had last season or even the last 2 years. So yeah, overall, just like there was a refreshing air in the room that it's hard not to sort of be pulled in by the promise, even though, we're really going to see what JJ Redick is all about once the games start and once he starts to face adversity. But at the very least, you have to appreciate the process. This might all go to hell,
Yeah.
but you can't complain about the things that he's laying, the foundation he's laying down right now with these players. So Yeah, we know that all, like, we know that this could all just be words in the typical media day honeymoon phase at the end of the day. But at least for now, again, JJ Redick is leading by example. And when the players see him working as hard as he has been early on and as hard as they're working, I think they're really going to resonate to that type of work ethic and follow suit. So, yeah, overall, just yeah, I are you buying what JJ Redick's selling, Tommy?
I am buying, and just to like slightly add to your last point there, because I think it was a good one. It we who knows if the strategies are going to work with the players that or if the roster talent ends up being enough, or if any other thing comes in that bogs all this down. But to your point, we're at least approaching it the right way. We're giving ourselves the best chance, and that's all you can really ask for. And I think the crazy thing in hindsight about Darvin Ham's marathon and not a sprint comment is like that. Those are comments that like LeBron James can make because he's been playing for 21 years and is a player on the court. The coaching staff
Yeah.
should be sprinting from day one. They don't have to physically go
Yeah.
out there and play. And they when it's a back to back, okay, sorry, you got less sleep, but like you didn't go out there and play a 48-minute game. So like the expectation should be for all of the coaches to be sickos like JJ, right? And I think him saying stuff like this is a really good sign that he's holding that group accountable, because those are the guys who should be, you want those guys sprinting from day one. Those guys don't need to be easing into anything. And it's nice to see that coming through.
Yeah, for sure. And lastly, there was a lot of Max Christie talk. Max Christie figures to be a very integral and important figure to this roster this upcoming season. And it's we got the report from Jovan Buha today that apparently LeBron, JJ Redick, and Max Christie were meeting at a hotel last night to plan
No,
out the season. And I'm like, whoa, when
no.
did Max Christie become a team captain?
No, it's like
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry. I think you misread that. The whole team met, but
Oh, did I?
yeah, the whole team met, but they said that like JJ, LeBron, and Max were the ones who shared in their interviews that they met. But the
Okay,
whole team was there.
okay,
Yeah, yeah.
gotcha. No, I like my version of the
I
story
like your
better. It's
version
like
better as
LeBron,
well.
Max Christie, and Redick, and like
Yeah,
holed up in a room. It's just them three for some
yeah.
reason. Anyways, that'll do it for this episode. Shoot. Training camp is underway. We're starting to get videos of the practice sessions and whatnot. And on Friday, we're going to have our first preseason game with the new JJ Redick Lakers. So that should be fun and exciting. But with that said, we will catch you guys next time. Follow us on Twitter at Lakers Legacy Pod. Please also rate and review us 5 stars on the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Lakers Legacy Pod. And with that said, Tommy, I will catch you later.
Peace.
See ya.